Hmm. So let's begin, sir. Am I audible?
Yes,
Today we are again having with us Professor Rajnath. In his earlier interview, he had discussed his long and variegated critical career right from his BHU days, where he was doing his master's and he did his PhD on Coleridge. In his critical career of almost 60 years, he has given several theories, several critical dictums. Most interesting critical dictums given by him are concerned with critical pluralism, and he has also talked about how literature is the interplay of romanticism and classicism. So, from sir, we would discuss today what critical pluralism is, what are the impacts on this theory of critical pluralism. Is it in some way related to Chicago critics or reader response theory or something like that? Sir, please, we want to listen to you, sir.
yes. Today I'm going to focus on my theory of literature, which is linked up with my theory of criticism, which I discussed in my last lecture.
Yeah,
Theory of literature is also tied up with the theory of criticism. And my theory, in fact, emerges out of the two doctoral theses which I have done. One is BHU, Coleridge and Modern Criticism. The other is Leeds University, T.S. Elias Theory of Poetry. And before the first doctoral thesis, I wrote my MA dissertation on nature imagery of the major romantic poets. So you can see that in my very early phase, I was very impressed by and very interested in romantic poetry. And I covered all the five romantic poets, including Coleridge. For my doctoral thesis, I worked on Coleridge and modern criticism.
yeah,
This topic was given to me by my teacher, Professor Virat.
yeah,
In course of his lecture on literary criticism, one day he talked about Coleridge's influence on modern criticism. And he made a cryptic remark, I hope that one of you will explore this difficult area for doctoral research. After my MA, I went to him and I said, Sir, I want to explore this area which you mentioned in the class for my doctoral thesis. Started working on that. And I've said already in my earlier lecture that in course of my reading for my doctoral thesis, I came across references to the Chicago critics. and I noticed that they were more sensible than the new critics. Some years later, I went to England for my second doctoral thesis on T.S. Eliot's theory of poetry. Eliot is a self-confessed classicist.
Yeah.
Coley was a romantic,
Good.
and just after my doctoral research, I went to Hyderabad to work on the Chicago critics. So what happens, very early in my career, I moved away from the romantics and towards the Chicago critics. The Chicago critics are known as the Chicago New Aristotelians. In other words, I moved from romanticism very early in my life towards classicism. And then I went to England to work on T.S. Eliot, who is, as I've said, a self-confessed classicist. So I'm shifting from one to the other, starting with romanticism and then moving towards classicism. Classicism in the Chicago critics, classicism also in T.S. Eliot. So what happened, I realized in the course of my reading and thinking that these two movements cannot be completely separated from each other. There is some common area between the two. The romantics and the classicists. So uh, in 92, I published a book called Critical Speculations. Some of you may be familiar with this book.
Yeah, yeah.
In this book, I have written an essay on poetry, personality, and impersonality. So you'll notice that I very often combine personality and impersonality, romanticism and classicism. And in this essay, I've defined poetry. Said poetry is the dialectic of the personal and the impersonal at the level of experience as well as form, and subsumes in it romanticism and classicism. That in poetry, both combine romanticism and classicism. So that is the crux of my theory of literature, that both combine in literature, both combine in poetry. And I was also using my knowledge of the Chicago critics. The Chicago critics were against generalizations. They believed in pluralism. And I was giving the message that neither of the two is complete. We can't dismiss romanticism, we can't dismiss classicism. This is my pluralism. The two must be combined. In England, when I was doing my thesis on T.S. Eliot, I have used certain terms. Those who have read the book know that in Eliot's criticism, I found five types of personality and types of impersonality. Personality is central to romanticism, impersonality central to classicism, What the message which I was trying to suggest is that Eliot is neither 100% romanticist nor 100% classicist. There's a book on T.S. Eliot. It's called Romanticism and T.S. Eliot's Criticism. That is demonstrating that in Eliot's Criticism, there is a strain of romanticism, a strong strain of romanticism. And one of my research scholars, currently head English department, has done a thesis under my supervision on T.S. Eliot and neoclassical poetry. So one is placing him in the category of the romantics, the other is placing him in the category of the classicists. And the fact is, both combine in literary criticism. In my doctoral thesis, there is a chapter on impersonality, where I have put together all the statements that Eliot has made on romanticism and classicism. Date-wise, nothing left out. So in the early phase, I've noticed that Eliot is saying that he's a classicist. Then in the later phase, he says he's a romanticist. So
Particularly
now
the
he's a
essay on
classicist
W.B.
of the
Yeats.
romanticist.
Particularly the essay on W.B. Yeats.
So I have made a statement in my thesis that he's neither altogether a romanticist nor an altogether classicist. He combines the two. And I've demonstrated both the elements in Eliot's writings, romanticism as well as classicism. We all know the statement that Eliot made in 1928 in the preface to Lancelot and Druce. I'm not, I'm a realist in politics.
Hmm.
I'm an Anglo-Catholic in
Intelligence.
religion, and I'm a classicist in literature.
Yeah, yeah.
He made that statement clear, categorical. But I have demonstrated in the thesis that we should not take Eliot at his word. And I have demonstrated the romantic elements in his writings. He says he's a classicist, but he is also a romanticist.
Good.
So these other statements are also put together in that book. And I've said that we should not take Eliot at his word. He is both a romanticist and a classicist. That became my theory that the two elements combine. So I'm not generalizing in favor of romanticism or in favor of classicism. This is my pluralism. And I have made this point again and again in my writings. One question must be occurring in your mind. I've said already that my Christian moves from formalistic Christian to cultural Christian.
Yeah, yeah.
About the Chicago critics, where do they come? So in the later phase, when I turn to cultural criticism, then I have problem with the Chicago critics. In my book, Christian and Culture, there is a chapter, Monism versus Pluralism in Christian and Culture. In both Christian and culture, I believe in pluralism. The fact of the matter is that the classicists, I'm sorry, the Chicago critics do not talk about culture. They only talk about critical pluralism. And this, for me, is one of the weaknesses of the Chicago critics, that they do not focus on human life, human concerns, cultural values. In 2000 13, I delivered my presidential address at Andhra University, Voltaire, and that is also my critical document. It's also my theory. When I focused on culture, and in one place, I admitted that the Chicago critics do not talk about culture. So I have made a statement extending critical pluralism to cultural pluralism. Hence the essay Monism versus pluralism in Christian and culture. And there I have extended the Chicago critics' pluralism to culture. And I have in detail discussed this in my presidential address. In great detail. There is a section in my address, Culture and Christian, how culture matters in Christian. Culture matters certainly in creative writing. You asked an intelligent question in my last lecture. How about fiction? Do you apply formalistic Christian or cultural Christian? I said yes. Cultural Christian form is there in a sense, but that was more applicable to poetry. In fiction, I focus on culture. I examine characters by cultural standards, and I have greatly praised a character in a suitable boy, Lata
Lata
Mehra.
Mehra. Lata Mehra.
And I've said that she is the most cultured per character in Indian English fiction. And I've just completed an essay on the shadow lines where Amitabh goes, which I have criticized strongly for ignoring culture. There is no character in the fiction, in the novel, who can be called culture. So I've extended this to my literary criticism that in my discussions, I'll focus on culture. I return to T.S. Eliot. Most of you know that there is a development in T.S. Eliot's poetry. There is development also in T.S. Eliot's criticism.
Yeah.
And he also moves from formalistic criticism to what you can call cultural criticism or religious criticism. The second word is well known. His poem, The Wasteland, is well known. But in the later phase, he wrote an essay which became a little controversial, Religion and Literature. And the outcome of this critical attitude was Ash Wednesday. Ash
Ash Wednesday.
Wednesday is the most religious, the most liturgical poem by T.S. Eliot. And he wrote an essay, Religion and Literature. So he's writing an essay on religion literature. He's writing a poem like Ash Wednesday, which is actually a potentially religious title. Ash Wednesday. Ash Wednesday is a day celebrated in Christianity, first day of Lent. And then he realized that this much of Christian will not do. So after that, he wrote four quarters. He wrote on poetry and poets. And he did not return to that kind of crude religious criticism. So these four poems, four quarters, is considered his great achievement. Some say, some say that this is the finest poem that Eliot has written. This is F.R. Lewis. F.R. Lewis, as you know, was a great advocate of T.S. Eliot. New beginnings in English poetry, he admires Sky High, T.S. Eliot, and his The Wasteland. But after his conversion to religion, to Christianity, he changed. He wrote Four Quarters. And F.R. Lewis thinks that Four Quarters is the finest poem by T.S. Eliot, not The Wasteland. I differ with him. He is taking this word culture in very narrow sense. And I've written two essays, which is part of my new book, which is just released. One on the wasteland, the other on Four Quarters. And I've demonstrated that in both the poems, culture is important. He said that the wasteland is life-denying poem, life-denying. And Four Quarters is life-affirming. Life in this world does not matter in the wasteland, says Lewis, and life in this world matters in Four Quarters. I have questioned Lewis and demonstrated that in the wasteland also, life matters, it's life affirming. Lewis is part of the picture. April is the coolest month. You all remember this line, the opening line. And this refers to
Chaucer.
Canterbury Tales by
Chaucer.
Chaucer. We all know that.
Yeah.
So Lewis jumps to the conclusion that is life denying. April, such a pleasant month, life affirming, and he finds April the coolest month. I have answered this. That he's saying one side of the picture. He is thinking of modern life, where April has become the coolest month. But Eliot also emphasizing life in conservatives, that is life affirming. People are undertaking a journey to Canterbury to pay homage to the Saint Becket. So he sees one side, he does not see the other side. So throughout the poem, the same thing happens, and I have questioned Lewis on this. That you see one side and don't see the other side, the life affirming side, which Eliot finds in the past. Life denying, Eliot finds in modern life. When it comes to Four Quarters, I have again questioned Lewis. It is life affirming. But even the wasteland is life affirming. I have already demonstrated. And this Four Quarters is, of course, life affirming. But unfortunately, F.R. Levy gives the wrong example of life affirming Four Quarters. So I have given the correct passage that this is life affirming. Both are life affirming in two different senses. So that became my criterion. In fiction, I have told you, in poetry also, that Eliot should not be dismissed, saying that he does not believe any good thing can happen in today's life. That is wrong. So these two things combined in my literary criticism. As in Eliot's literary criticism, you must have read somewhere Eliot's statement that his poetry is the byproduct
A
of his
byproduct of
private poetry workshop. It's a
uh,
byproduct of his private poetry workshop.
criticism is the
In
byproduct
my
of it.
thesis, I have demonstrated just the opposite. I'm not dismissing, but I've argued that His poetry, in a sense, is the outcome of his theory. As his theory changes, his poetry changes. Now, in my Christian also, the same thing happens. As my Christian changes its complexion, my attitude towards literature changes. I look for a different quality in literature. For example, in my early writings, I have not focused on culture. And those who have read my essay in Christian will know that there is an essay on Ever Winters, ironically titled Ever Winters are the moral fallacy, because Winter says that both Eliot and Frost are no good because the moral element is missing from their poetry. And I've said in reply, why should these poets bother about morality? Their achievement is artistic achievement. I dismiss Ever Winters. But in Christian culture, I have focused on culture. So I have moved from there to culture. My Christian is changing. My attitude to literature is also changing. And you can see this change in my critical writings. But in 1984, something happened in my critical academic life. I returned from America. I'd gone to the States later. 81 I left, 82 I came back, 84 I became professor of English at Allahabad University. And as you perhaps know, the same year I launched my journal,
Yeah.
Journal of Literary Criticism. The first issue was an open issue. The second issue was a special number on deconstruction, with which you may be familiar. Special
Yeah.
number on deconstruction. What was deconstruction and what the problem? This was a big problem for me. Whereas others were not affected, but I was greatly affected because data was challenging the identity of literature. In 84, people had hardly heard of deconstruction. Professor A.R.K. Kaul, Jaipur, had come to Allahabad. We were sitting together in a restaurant talking over a cup of tea. And he said, Rajnath, what are you currently engaged in? I said, I'm planning a special number of my journal on deconstruction. He knew about the journal. So what is this? He laughed. What is this funny sounding word which you are taking so seriously? It's no, it's an important movement which is influencing every domain of life. So I brought a special number. Now the problem that deconstruction created for me and perhaps for everyone is, everyone solves his problem in his own way. I had a bigger problem because I've always been an advocate of literature of a kind, criticism of a kind, and I've always accepted challenges, which I've told you already, coming from anywhere. So I say I can't take it lying down, and I will take this challenge. In that issue, I published an essay, and I wrote an essay which everybody can understand. The title was The New Christian and Deconstruction Attitudes to
Mm.
Language and Literature.
Yeah.
And in that essay, if you have read, I have made a remark against Derrida and deconstruction. I have charged Derrida with nihilism. This was my charge against him. The essay was read by practically everyone in Hindi and English, but nobody noticed the charge which I brought against Derrida, that it is nihilistic. So there are two kinds of people. Those did not bother about deconstruction, they just dismissed it. I remember Narasimha said to someone, "What is Rajnath doing? Wasting his time on deconstruction." And very renowned Hindi critic Namvar Singh had read my essay. And he talked about this theory without mentioning anything, but he did not try to understand. So this theory, which denied the identity of literature, was a problem to me because I could not accept that literature has no identity of itself. I say I will take it. I will take this challenge and establish that literature has an identity. So I published a book, which you may have seen, The Identity of Literature, a reply to Jacques Derrida. And very systematically, I have established that literature has an identity of its own. And it is such a difficult movement. I had to spend a lot of time reading outside literature into linguistics. My dear friend Jonathan Carrer knew deconstruction better than anybody else anywhere in the world. Actually, Carrer should have translated of gametology into English, not Gayatri Spivak. She does not understand deconstruction. I don't know how much of French she knew, but Jonathan Carrer knew French language as well as English. And his first book was, not many people know, was written in French on Flaubert. Flaubert are the uses of uncertainty. Remember, uncertainty is a word used by Derrida. His philosophy is the philosophy of uncertainty. And that book has become a classic of Flaubert criticism. Flaubert, the uses of uncertainty. Then he wrote Structured Poetics. Then he wrote many other books. So it is Jonathan Carrer who should have translated our dramatology into English. Carrer is a dear friend, and I did not want to put up a fight with him, but I knew that I differed because I was against Derrida, he was for Derrida. When he met me at the American University at Buffalo, he came to my office and was trying to convert me into a deconstructionist. And then I did not accept. I have emphasized poetry, personality, and impersonality. He was trying to establish that what you say is personal is impersonal. What you say impersonal is personal. I knew that he was going in the direction of deconstruction. So I did not accept. Then I spent a lot of time reading in linguistics, this and that, and wrote my book, The Identity of Literature, a reply to Jock Dylan. Perhaps you know that data then was an intellectual giant. Everybody was coming under Derrida's influence. Everybody, all disciplines of life and thought, all influenced by Derrida. Now, in that period, imagine someone from India challenging Derrida, a reply to Jacques Derrida. And very interesting, many years later, he also recanted. He realized that he was mistaken. I've written an essay on this. Derrida U-turn and its consequences. Derrida took a U-turn and he came to where I wanted him to be. So after the terrorist attack on World Trade Center, Habermas, whom I have always admired, and Derrida, they were in New York, and they decided to give a series of interviews to press to be published in book form. So in that, Derrida took a U-turn. But in India and many other countries, people still don't know that Derrida has taken a U-turn. They still admire the old Derrida. So that made me very happy. So I wrote an essay, you did a U-turn. And that means everything was he denied was back. For example, the, the distinction between literature and philosophy, they had denied. Now this distinction comes back. And in my book, The Identity of Literature, the opening chapter is philosophy, literature, and criticism. Philosophy, literature, and criticism. That means I believe that philosophy and literature are two different disciplines. Philosophy is not literature. I established, then went further, and I continue with my cultural response to literature everywhere. In fiction, I have told you, and in T.S. Eliot, in both the essays, one on the Westland, the other on four quarters. I have emphasized culture in both the essays. So this is my development that I started with my immense interest in romanticism and moved away to a balance of romanticism and classicism.
May I
They
say something,
combine.
sir? May I say something?
Yes, now I think you have time, you can ask questions.
And it's not a question, just an observation. Even in life, I think one can't be completely romantic or completely classicist. Even life is a balancing of the two.
You asking me this question?
No, I am saying that even in life, we have the interplay of romanticism and classicism. Nobody can be completely imaginative or nobody can be completely classicist.
Yes, yes, I've said it. I've said it again and again
Hmm.
that romanticism and classicism will have to combine in literature. They will have to combine in literature. And this is what Eliot also realizes. If you read my book, T.S. Eliot's Theory of Poetry, in the chapter on impersonality, I've listed those critical opinions by Eliot. Now is a classicist, now is a romanticist. Now is a classicist, now is a romanticist. So I've said in my remark that he is both. He is a romanticist, also a classicist. Actually, he wants the two to come together. Not complete romanticism, not complete classicism. This is what we need in life. This is what we need in literature. We can't become completely free like the romantics,
Yeah.
but we can't jacket ourselves like classics.
So thank you, sir, for this enlightening discussion. Hope
Thank you, Ajahn. Thank you. Uh,
we would
so,
discuss
so
some other day. Pranam, sir. Pranam, sir.
we'll keep in touch. Yes.
Okay, sir.